United States is claiming that this is the big victory that they saw, yet they are also claiming that they want to pursue more war if things don't work out. It's quite the contradiction.
It is, isn't it? But I think the problem is that the longer this confrontation lasts, the more problems the United States government will have at home. And the Trump regime will be more in trouble with his base, because if this is some sort of absolute victory, when the Iranian response comes, they will say, well, then it wasn't an absolute victory. And then if the Americans attack again, then people will start saying, this is exactly what you promised not to do. Although he's already violated and he's already torn up all the, and got, he's ignored the promises that he's made to his base and the American people. But if this continues, it is going to make it much more difficult for him. I think that the United States really is in a big mess with regards to Iran. And I think it's because of their ignorance. It's a very ignorant government. The US political establishment is very ignorant. The Israelis are very ignorant. US think tankers are very ignorant. They said that, all you have to do is push Iran and it'll collapse. On Friday, we saw across the country, under the threat of airstrikes and missiles and drones, we saw Iranians across the country, and this people can go and view it online. Massive crowds across the country. People came to the city under the threat of death and voiced support for Iran's resistance. This is not a weak state. This is no pushover government. The Islamic Republic of Iran is powerful. It has always been powerful. It has always enjoyed a large degree of legitimacy in the eyes of the public. But now they've united Iran like it's never been united before, except for during the period when Saddam Hussein, with the support of the United States and the Soviet Union, invaded Iran in the 1980s. During that period of time, we saw the same sort of gathering of people and the same sort of unity that we see today. The Israeli regime, true, as Ali pointed out, they carried out a sudden attack. They tried to glamorize it in the West. Glamorizing murder is what Western media does usually, for two reasons. One is they wanted to whitewash the Israeli regime for the crimes that it is now, as we speak, carrying out in Gaza. And today there was another massacre, a huge massacre of children being slaughtered every day, they want that to disappear. And then they want to, by demonizing Iran day and night, over the past week, the mass media, the corporate media, the legacy media, they want to distract attention away from that, and also to whitewash the Israeli regime and say the Israeli regime is doing a service to the world by attacking Iran. So corporate media is the same. I mean, it's a tool. They've exposed themselves during this Holocaust, and we saw how it's no difference. There's no difference between CNN and Fox News. There's no difference between the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Times of London or the Guardian or France 24 and Deutsche Welle. They're all the same. They're all the same. The narrative, the way in which they construct their narratives may be different, but the underlying objective is the same. So they demonized Iran in order to prepare the grounds for war. And so, by the way, did the head of the IAEA and the Board of Governors. We have to keep in mind that the IAEA is a Western-bound political body. It is controlled by the West, like all international institutions created after the Second World War. They have the majority. The West has the majority there. So they try to demonize Iran to prepare the grounds for an attack. The media prepared the grounds for the attack. Why? They all wanted to save Israel. They wanted to whitewash the Israeli regime and to save the regime. This is not about Iran's nuclear program. That's just an excuse, whether it's the nuclear program, whether it's human rights, whether it's animal rights, whether it's terrorism, or whatever it is they say. These are all just tools and means for them to corner Iran, to hurt Iran, to help the Israeli regime, because the Israeli regime must rule supreme in West Asia and North Africa. But as I was saying, Iranians are united today. It's always been strong. As I said, the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had a high degree of legitimacy. And people and what the West has also done is that they've destroyed the worldview of the liberal elites in Iran. They've crushed it, because in the past, these people used to think that, well, maybe if we try to negotiate, or it's our fault, we should negotiate, and then if we negotiate with them in good faith, then things will sort themselves out. And we're the problem. We were negotiating, and they were plotting behind our backs. And then they attacked us. And then we continued to negotiate. As you saw, the foreign minister was in meeting the European three, the British, the French, and the Germans, and they were still conspiring behind Iran's back. These regimes are deceitful. They're dishonest. They cannot be trusted. The Israelis have killed. They bombed the Red Crescent building in Tehran. They bombed the hospital. They bombed an ambulance. They bombed families in their cars. In one case, they murdered a woman, the entire family, but one of those who was murdered. She was 8.5 months pregnant. You don't see any of this in the Western media. But when a missile strikes Tel Aviv, you'll see Western media, express deep concern about the injured, and they were really, they were terribly upset, or about a military hospital which they kept saying was struck, whereas it wasn't even struck. The missile hit next door. So their double standards is becoming clear to ordinary Iranians. Ordinary Iranians see these things. They're not stupid. And the liberal elites who thought differently and were brought up to think that the West is, they see the West through mainstream media. They see it through mainstream university textbooks that are translated into Persian. The social science textbook. Most of our social sciences and our humanities textbooks at university are translations of Western texts. So the more we study, the more Eurocentric and we become often. Yet all these readings and all these news programs and so on that they've been listening to all their lives have turned out to be nonsense. They see it on the ground here in Iran. The foreign minister was negotiating with Witkoff. On day one, Witkoff said, yeah, sure, we can have a deal. Iran can enrich at 3.67% for its nuclear in order to produce electricity. Then he flipped. Then it turns out since then, and perhaps even earlier, as Nima was alluding to because of the planning for the attack, from before the negotiations even began, it's quite possible that they were plotting to attack Iran, but they were pretending that they were serious. And also they think that, but the interesting thing is that they think Iran is naive. Iran was on alert when the Israelis attacked. And also, that general who said that no one knew but a few Americans that this attack was going to be launched, and the Iranians were caught unaware. Just last night at 12 p.m., I was on 3 different spaces, X spaces, within an hour and a half an hour for each, and in all of them, I said that an attack is imminent. I'm just an ordinary Iranian, so it's not as if the Americans they're just talking to their own public, trying to convince their public how strong they are and how masculine they are and how they can kill people at will. But in reality, what are they doing? The entire global South sees through this facade. And the Iranian people are more united than ever before. And those Iranians who are always pro-Western, they're seeing the reality that this government that has been demonized by Persian media day and night, the Persian media in the West, because they have a huge media apparatus in Persian. There's nothing like it in the world. BBC Persian, Deutsche Welle Persian, Iran International, all these news channels, websites, these online armies that they have, they were all saying, they're constantly attacking Iran. And so a lot of these young Iranian liberals and older liberals who were always thinking negatively about Iran were saying, well, the Iranians were negotiating. The Iranians were talking, and then the Israelis struck. And then the Iranians were negotiating again when the Americans struck. Does that do the United States any good? I don't think so. But going back to what Ali says, I think the focus will remain on the Israeli regime, but I'm sure that the Iranians are going to retaliate anyway. I have no doubt that the Iranians are going to strike the United States. I don't know how, where, when, but the Iranians are very careful. They calculate, they're not emotional, they don't just take decisions. Suddenly, if they wanted to make an emotional choice, they would have struck back last night. And we have to keep in mind that the Iranian ability to strike the Americans is far greater than its ability to harm the Israelis. This is something that ordinary people have to keep in mind. Iran is defeating the Israelis. There's no doubt about it. Otherwise, the Americans and the Europeans wouldn't be so worried about the situation, and the Americans wouldn't have gotten involved. But Iran is still beating them. Yet, firing missiles at Israel and firing long-range drones at Israel is more difficult than firing short-range missiles and medium-range missiles and medium-range and short-range drones at Americans in the Persian Gulf region. Those missiles are much more mobile. Those missiles are much more accurate. And Iran has a lot more of those. It has tens of thousands of missiles to hit Israel with, and tens of thousands of drones. So imagine what they have in the Persian Gulf. They've been preparing for potential war with the United States since the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And even before that, but after that, they took it very seriously. So across the Persian Gulf, and that's why it's called the Persian Gulf, because they own one side of it. Across the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, you have Iranian underground bases everywhere with all these missiles and drones. And those missiles and drones reach the other side within minutes. You won't have people like Nima watching the missiles pass over and for them to take 15, 20, or whatever amount of minutes to get there. They'll be there immediately. They'll destroy everything. And what do we have on the other side of the Persian Gulf? We have glass palaces. All those regimes are complicit because they host those bases. Qatar pays for all the expenses in its bases, the American bases there. They pay for it. The Americans, whatever they do, is paid for by Qatar. They're complicit, and they've always been complicit. None of these family dictatorships, none of them are sincere allies of the Palestinian people. Qatar is home to CENTCOM. Turkey is a part of NATO. Turkey and Aliyev and Azerbaijan, as we speak, continue to transport oil to Israel. As cities close to the border of Turkey and the Republic of Azerbaijan are being bombed inside Iran, they're continuing to fund or to export oil to Netanyahu. As the genocide and the Holocaust in Gaza continues, they continue to support them. They're all more or less, complicit, and they're not sincere about the Palestinian cause. But these countries in the Persian Gulf, they're very vulnerable. They cannot defend themselves. If there's a war in the Persian Gulf, most of these families won't last a few hours, at most a few days. They're very lucky, a couple of weeks. It'll be over very quickly. And then imagine what happens to the global oil market. The Iranians are the side that are behaving responsibly. The Iranians don't want the war. The only people who want war are the Zionists, Netanyahu, the neocons, and their fanatical allies. Well, they're Zionists too. Only these people want war. But if the regime in Washington, if the Trump regime continues down this road, that's what we're going to get. Iran, so it will retaliate. It will be proportionate. It will be a retaliation which deters further aggression, but they will retaliate. But the focus will continue to be on Palestine, and we saw that this morning. The Iranians taught Israel a good lesson today. They were unable to defend themselves. They're anti-missile, and the Iranians are, for the most part, using older missiles. Just this morning, they used a few, I don't know how many, a couple maybe, advanced missiles that they haven't used before.
We're obviously concerned about what happened yesterday, what's happened since June 13, what happened this morning, what may happen in the immediate hours and days next. But I just kind of want to pan out and look at the longer term picture for Israel. No matter how this military confrontation plays out, it seems to me that by launching this attack against Iran, Israel, in a sense, has sealed its own fate, because what future is there for Israel in this region? I'm reading reports in the Israeli media this morning about how Israelis are flocking to Egypt. They're passing through the Taba crossing into Sinai in order to escape from the country. There's a report in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper today, about where they interview some of those people returning to the United States, some who have never been to the US, but they have relatives there, so they're leaving. They talked to one man who is returning to Russia. And also, apparently, many are leaving through Jordan because flights are still operating from Jordan to other parts of the world. So they're trying to get out. And the Israeli government, which is allowing limited operation of aviation to bring Israelis home, but not to allow them out. So the Israeli government has banned Israelis from leaving the country by air. They're allowed to leave through the land crossings, but they're not allowed to leave by air from Ben Gurion Airport, ostensibly for their own safety. But, Israelis who want to leave are making the choice that they would rather take the risk of flying out of Ben Gurion Airport to Larnaca in Cyprus or to Athens or to wherever they might go on from there, that would be much safer than staying in Israel as it's bombarded by missiles. And the Israeli government has even set up this so-called exceptions committee, so that if you're an Israeli who wants to leave the country, you have to apply to a special government committee who will decide whether you're worthy to leave the country, whether you have a good enough excuse to leave the country, whether it's medical or whatever. And so look at the irony here. For decades, we've been told this propaganda that Israel is necessary. It was necessary to ethnically cleanse and murder the Palestinians so that Jews could have this one safe spot on earth that they could escape to truly be safe, because they weren't safe anywhere else. And the reality is that Israel, thanks to the behavior of the Zionist regime, is the single most dangerous place on earth for Jews by far. And Jews in Israel who want safety are trying to get back to the United States, back to Russia, back to Europe, through Egypt, through Jordan, through these countries where we're told people are so hateful and hate Jews so much that Jews wouldn't even be safe there, notwithstanding the fact that their governments have treaties with Israel. But we're told that the people are so hostile, and yet still Israelis prefer to leave through Jordan and Egypt than to stay in the most dangerous place on earth for Jews. And if we go back to this Israeli military cyber park that was attacked by by Iran on Friday in Beersheba and Beersheba, This is a major Israeli military installation, cyber warfare installation, with major IDF cyber command structures there. But it was also intended as this sort of technology park to integrate the military with the high-tech industry and all the startups. In other words, using all these civilian companies as human shields for the Israeli military. That would be one way to put it, but also to encourage foreign companies to invest in Israel. So one of the companies that's there in that cyber park, and we all saw videos of fires raging near its building, is Microsoft, which, as we know, thanks to current and former workers at Microsoft, is deeply involved in the genocide. But other US companies, high-tech companies, also have offices there, including IBM, including Motorola, and a whole list of others. And so you have to ask, which company in its right mind is going to invest in Israel, looking at this picture, is going to put billions of dollars into Israel, into its high-tech industry, when Israel's own high-tech workers are leaving? In that Haaretz article this morning, one of the people they interviewed who was queuing up at the Egyptian border to get out of there as fast as he can was a high-tech worker. And he said, I can work remotely from anywhere. I don't need to be here under the missiles. And that's true. That's a calculation that other people will make too. Maersk, the Danish shipping giant that has been very complicit in the genocide, there's been a big Palestinian-led global campaign called Mask Off Maersk, focusing on how Maersk is helping Israel to bring in the weapons of genocide that it's using against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Well, Maersk just announced that it's suspended all calls for its ships into Haifa and other Israeli ports just because it's too dangerous. So, yes, probably at some point the ports will open up. Probably at some point the airport will open back up. Probably at some point some of those Israelis will feel safe enough to come back and spend some time in order to maintain their social security benefits and not be struck off the residence register. That's what a lot of them do. Even though they're living abroad, they come and go so that they can maintain their social benefits in Israel, by not being away for too long at a time. But when you look at the long term, who's going to invest in this dying maniacal project that is at war, that has launched aggressions against 5 neighboring countries simultaneously and is threatening more? I think we're witnessing this wild genocidal lashing out, this attack on Iran, this unhinged aggression is the death throes of this brutal settler project. It's coming to an end. And the pretense, of course, the Trump administration of the United States are what they are. But the Europeans have also, the European regimes which even pretended to be oppositional to Trump, and, we're so horrified by this ogre Donald Trump. Well, the reality is they all got in line behind Donald Trump. They were all thrilled. They couldn't conceal their glee at the Israeli and American attack on Iran. None of them condemned it. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, hasn't condemned it. He's supposed to. His job is to defend international law of the UN Charter, and he would not condemn this blatant aggression against Iran that is a gross violation of the most fundamental principles of the UN Charter. So all their masks are off. This pretense of this liberal world order built on international law, built on human rights, is crashing down. And the people who see it are not just the people in the global south, in the targeted countries, but in the United States, in Europe, the publics there all see it. It's standing naked. And so we're at a moment in history where the world is changing, and this change is ongoing. The old is dying, but the new is not yet born. That's definitely a phase we're in. And we all have to hope and work for that, despite the horrific suffering that these powers can inflict on people, that what is born is a better world, and one in which power is held by people in sovereign nations, in independent nations, and not by these empires that believe that they have a God-given right to rule the planet in their own interests. That world has to come to an end, and something more just and better has to be born out of this.